It's time for an update on Tarleton State with AD Uryasz.
NIL, revenue sharing, and NCAA changes are always in the news. So we're back on the Big Mountain with a very special guest.
Welcome back to the Big Mountain. I am JY. This is my good friend Steve, and we have back with us the AD of Tarleton State University, Steve Uryasz. This is his second time on the mountain. Great to have some returning guests with us. We talk about the Texans, where they were at this past year, some of the championships they were able to go to, playoffs they were able to go to in their first year of eligibility. Of course, we have to talk about facilities and kind of what the future holds here for the Texans with this new revenue sharing potential push for FBS. A great conversation here with Steve, so we'll get right into it. All right, we are here with AD Uryasz. Great to have you back on the Big Mountain.
Well, thank you for having me back. It's been such a long time. I thought maybe I offended you last time. I hadn't heard from you. Just joking.
Yes, no, not at all. We love to have all these conversations. We're really fortunate that we, have had a lot of people on here for discussions and stuff, and love to have some people back on the mountain. So, Steve, you get to be one of them here. I know you just got back from a trip to Oregon here the end of last week. You were up there for the NCAA track and field championships. Just overall, how did the 24-25 athletic year go there for the Texans?
Yeah, no, it was a really, really good year. It went by quickly. As you know, I started in May of 20, really April of 24, and it was a whirlwind first year. Talk about track and field. Guys, it's the first time in my history I've been to Eugene, Oregon, and I'm in year basically 39. So for me, I had really no concept what I was going to see in Eugene. Obviously, I've been to a lot of football stadiums, but never been to a track complex like that. Unbelievable. Unbelievable experience. We took a group of donors with us, and this was our first year being eligible to participate in NCAA championships. So we had 7 student athletes that represented Tarleton State University. You may have seen Victoria Cameron, who actually was in the finals of the 100 meters. So it was really a tremendous experience for our student athletes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I know I see the pictures of that complex. It looks amazing. So
Yeah, well, was it kind of interesting being there. We were both talking about, we've been following, baseball, softball, track and field, all these NCAA championships where you see schools of all sizes compete. You have Oregon, you have Georgia, and all Division I schools competing. And it's just a great mix. And then you're at this place where obviously Nike money has built that place. I mean, it is one of the most beautiful facilities ever. So, what was the atmosphere like where, you guys are competing against the biggest schools in the country, the richest schools in the country, but you're all in the same playing field?
Yeah, it was really fun. And I think the thing that was most fun is to see our student athletes be able to compete at that level. We hired Bobby Carter a year ago to come in and help us rebuild our track and field program, and he's done just that. So he's brought in a lot of student athletes that compete at a really, really high level. Really proud of he and the rest of the group. I'll say it again, that venue is like nothing I've been to in my life. It was a machine. And, we sat there and you look over your shoulder and there is Phil Knight sitting in a suite overlooking a track complex and all the different things. We were fortunate enough to get a tour. Mike Duncan, who's their associate athletic director for facilities, was super gracious and spent 3 hours with our staff, kind of walking through with our donors as well, taking us through the football complex, all the different things over there so we could see what they were doing. And you've seen it for years. I did tell him we're really disappointed because they started the trend in football helmets. It's done nothing but cost us a lot of money. But it was amazing. I tell you, the other thing that was fun is to have people come up to you when you're walking around Eugene and say, hey, where is Tarleton State?
Yeah.
And so it gave us a chance to really showcase not only Tarleton, but Stephenville, Texas. And then when you tell people where it is, it's exciting just to see the name recognition now.
No doubt, no doubt. And I tell you, I'm excited. I'll be down there visiting Tarleton State here in just a few months. Anxious to check out your facilities and attend a football game. But speaking of football, we're only a few months away from it. So let's transition real quick. I'd love to hear from you about kind of ramping up here, getting ready for the 25 football season. Depending on where you look, there's different sites that do portal classes and rankings and all this kind of jazz. But I know Tarleton State, one of the top FCS programs in terms of their portal class coming in. I know you had an average attendance last fall, I believe, over 19,000. Coach Witten looking to do great things. We were fortunate to have him on just a few months ago as well. Can you give us a little bit of a preview of what Texan football is going to be like this fall?
Yeah, I can tell you, obviously, really proud of what Coach and his staff did last year, 10-4, going into getting into the FCS playoffs in the first time, first year we're eligible. I believe we were the first team since 2009 that won our first FCS postseason game and first year of eligibility. So they've done an amazing job over there, and he keeps, pushing and pushing and pushing. I think one of the things, guys, that's really impressive, and if you look at it, you go out and look at the number of young men that that went into the portal for Tarleton State, and I believe the final number was 3. And that tells you a lot about how our young men feel about our football program, the things that are going on over there, the level of support they're getting, not only from the football coaching staff, the administration, the different programs. And we're highly invested. We start off this year, we go to Portland State in a week 0 game. Then we turn around and go to Army. As you know, nobody ever really stops practicing anymore. Yeah, there's rules. I understand that. But kids are around year round.
Yeah.
So in the 90s and early 90s, there were times where student athletes left during the summer. It's not the case. People are working out year round, you're programming, doing a variety of different things. And it's an exciting time. You go over there at 6:50 in the morning. I was just looking at the schedule. They're ramping up. They're running, and then they've got weights at 9. So but proud of Coach and the culture and the environment that he's built over there. And facility wise, I'll put our football facilities up against anybody at the FCS level, and many at levels above us as well.
Yeah, you mentioned a little bit earlier on, up in Eugene about some people asking who's Tarleton State. Only been in D1 here for a few years and going to places like Army and playing these schools now at the FCS and FBS level. Very quickly, people are going to know, we've been talking about Tarleton State for over a year now and trying to, get the word out about the great things that are happening there. But by playing these schools, going to the championships up in Eugene and all across the country, the name is going to get out really, really fast because there's success. And the student athletes, I think, speak for themselves, as you kind of mentioned as well. So I'm really excited for the football season. You mentioned the portal and only having 3, kind of go in. We talked about that with Coach Witten. If anybody is interested in that conversation, please check out our channel. We talk about a lot of that stuff. And he really praised, as you said, the coaches as a whole, that whole team of just investing in the students. And that's really why, you see them wanting to stick around with the Texans. Not only is it a great school, great facility, but the coaches and leadership really care about those athletes. You mentioned facilities. A couple questions there I have for you. Number one, I actually had somebody on X ask me if we could ask you about maybe the east side of the football stadium. If there's any plans for that, is there a timeline for that? Anything here with the football stadium, and then of course we'll get to the EECU center as well. But let's start with football first. Any plans here coming up?
I can tell you, we continually look at ways to enhance that stadium. I'll say this: our plan would be to blow up the east side. At some point. I don't have a definitive timeline, but that's the next thing that has to happen on the east side. And we've looked at, do you add suites over there? Do you structure things a little bit differently? Obviously, that's what we consider to be our visiting sideline. So you've got your students, your band, all your spirit groups over there. But that would be the next step over there, to have it mirror what we have on the west side. And like I said, I was so surprised coming here and seeing the advances that have been made in facilities that before I ever stepped foot on campus, which put Tarleton State in a position to really recruit. So we've got a comprehensive facility plan. Right now we opened up what we consider to be the hub over at baseball. We'll be doing some things at baseball, but we've got to continue to grow. The east side is part of our long-term plan. I do not have a definite timeline, but it does need to be done.
Great. Yeah.
Quick question about that. As far as you mentioned blowing it up, maybe putting some suites and things in there. What's the current strategy? Maybe your school specific, but just speaking in general. It used to be, it was always a war for capacity. We want to be the bigger stadium. You see now with revenue sharing, which we're going to talk about, and all of these things going on, where more and more schools are maybe not worrying about capacity, but trying to put in premium experiences where you can charge more money for higher ticket prices, get more money per paying customer that's coming in. So
Yeah.
what's your thoughts on that as far as just increasing capacity versus adding premium fan experiences and creating better fan experiences?
Yeah, it's not necessary. We don't need any more seating in Memorial Stadium. What we need is premium seating and revenue generation opportunities. You're 100% correct. And you're seeing that. I think one of the greatest examples within our own state here is what they did down at Baylor. And so Baylor, compared to their previous stadium, holds about 45,000 now, smaller, but has all the suites and the clubs and the loge boxes, those types of things. And we'll talk a little bit later about the EECU Center and the premium opportunities in there. But premium seating, loge boxes, clubs, those types of things are where our business is headed. And that's key because those are the things that generate the revenue necessary for rev share, for growth, in order for us to compete at the highest level.
Good stuff. Well, before we get to that EECU Center, just have to say, we talked a lot last time about the football facilities. Again, you can either check out that channel or absolutely that discussion or your website. Phenomenal facilities there for football and across the board, but especially football. Really, really great stuff. Let's talk about this new EECU Center that I believe is almost complete, about $125 million, if I'm not mistaken. Can you speak to where you're at with construction, and do you have an anticipated open date?
Yeah, it's amazing. I can walk out here to the right and turn to my left and see the EECU Center. It is a spectacular building, 7,500 seats. It will open in August, guys. And I can say this, I probably said it before, been at 5 different institutions. Nobody builds faster and better than Tarleton State University. And that's a difference maker for us. So when I first got here, that was just starting to come out of the ground, and we'll open in August of 25. And so 12 suites. We have loge boxes in there as well. Lower bowl, like I said, about 3,750 seats. Same thing up top. Club underneath, enough locker rooms so that we can host an MTE. There's some club areas that actually overlook the court. And the plan is that, it's not just a basketball facility, it's a facility where we'll have many, many events. The university is working right now to secure agreements for concerts that'll come out very soon. So it's a game changer. I will say this, it's not the biggest in the country, but I'll put it up there against some of the nicest in the country. And I really, really believe that. When you come to campus, you'll see it.
I'm super anxious to see it. Again, about 2 months after it opens, I guess I'll be able to hopefully be able to see that. The pictures again look fantastic. But I can tell you the couple trips that I've had, pictures are great, but when you have something that fantastic, pictures can only do it so much justice. When you're in the space and you get the feel for the real space, it's phenomenal. So I'm super anxious to check that out. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about maybe finances and kind of that hot topic we talked about, revenue sharing and where we're at here post settlement finally. And so I believe right now the athletic budget is going to be set around $36 million for next year, from what I was told. I think that puts you fairly close to, like a UTEP, a New Mexico State, a Troy, a Toledo. I know I mentioned these schools because these are schools we talk about on our pod a good bit. And so can you speak to both just the overall budget growth and where you're at with your athletics budget, and then how leadership helps, kind of focus the university, not just on athletics, but wants to ensure that you have a high level athletic programming there at Tarleton State?
Yeah, you hear it quite often that athletics is the front porch of an institution. And you'll hear our president, Dr. Hurley, turn around and say, athletics is very, very important. It's not the most important program on our campus,
Yeah.
but it is very, very important. And really, where it hit home for us here was you go back last year and you look at our ESPN game on ESPN2 to open the season. So over 100,000 unique hits on the university website, people keying in, what is Tarleton State?
Yeah.
And then we were actually laughing today with the chancellor because the Little League World Series went into a rain delay. And so they go into rain delay, and next thing you know, we end up on the
Oh,
the
nice.
mothership of ESPN, and our phones are blowing up with people sitting in bars, sitting in airports going, you guys are on national TV. And so we are very visible, and we're thankful that the institution understands how important that is to our students, to the people of Stephenville, to our alums, because it is important to be visible, to be out there, and it takes money to do that. So our budget is north of 35 million plus whatever we're doing in regards to new facilities and those types of things. We'll talk a little later. You may or may not be aware of the new weight room that we're getting ready to open here very soon, really first week of July. Puts us on a whole new plane for all of our sports. But we're competitive. We've poised ourselves when the time is right to make that transition, and that's key for us, is to compete at the highest level.
And let's talk about revenue sharing since we're talking about some of the
Sure.
finances. And I believe, you have said, or the university has determined that you will opt in to this new model, if you will. And one of the things that kind of came out late in the settlement that the judge seemed to have a little bit of a hang up on were roster limits and this grandfathering of roster limits. Was that something that you have ever had an issue with, or is that something you guys were worried about? Or was roster limits and kind of that grandfathered piece not too much of a concern for Tarleton?
We weren't terribly worried about that. And I think part of that, if you recall, in FCS traditionally, you had a cap, let's talk football, 63 scholarships, and that could be split up. Our roster was right around 110 anyway in our football program.
Okay.
And really, to oversimplify the roster caps and those types of things, obviously you have a census date. So any kid that was on your roster for the census date, they're allowed to stay until they exhaust their eligibility, but you can't add new excluded kids to the equation. So over time, those roster limits will work themselves back down so that they get to the original or the caps that were set. With anything, you have growing pains. There's things in some sports called practice players. That might be in women's basketball, that might be in volleyball. And the coaches were like, do those kids count? And originally it was, yeah, they all count. Well, then when you really look at it, it doesn't make sense. They're not on scholarship. They're not receiving this, that, or whatever. So with all the changes, we're going through some growing pains, but it's a lot better than it was before because it was so largely unregulated. And you're seeing that. You're seeing that with institutions front-end loading NIL deals prior to the July 1 deadline, so that institutions can begin, number one, making payments or executing actual agreements. But we weren't ever too terribly worried about the roster caps on our end.
Follow-up question on that, because we've really tried to get perspectives or try and find perspectives out there and see the difference between, let's say, P4 schools, G5 schools, FCS schools, just because you guys have such different budgets and manning levels. I want to ask you about the nuts and bolts. We already have the NCAA transfer portal. There's this
Right.
new clearinghouse where the NIL deals are going to have to be entered in. Are you concerned? Is the P4 creating this big administrative monster for you that you guys are going to have to participate in? Maybe add compliance people, whatever. Basically, are they giving you more work and possibly increasing your costs, and maybe you're not going to have a benefit from it.
And I think that's where the institution has to make the decision. Where do you want to compete? So we've made the decision. Number one, opted in. Number two is we want to compete. So we started last month. We had an individual start that handles all of our NIL. And, day to day, it's the contract, it's the fulfillment, it's the communication, it's the education with the student athletes. So we're in full bore as it relates to that aspect of it. Yeah, it creates more work. But I will tell you, and here's my personal philosophy, I think the problem that we ran into is that for years we did nothing for the student athletes. Yeah, we provided room, board, tuition, and fees, but the rules were such that you couldn't do things that really were common sense. So the pendulum started out here and it swung and it stuck here, and it did so very, very quickly. And so what we're trying to do is bring it more towards the center and get some regulation around it. When you take a look at the deals external to the institution, they do go through a clearinghouse per se, but those are every deal at or above the $599, $600 level. And so it'll be interesting to see how all that works out, because that's where they're going to have to figure out, what is fair market value. I don't think that's the exact term where they're going to continue to use, but it's just trying to get some parameters. But it still is vastly better than what has gone on for the last couple of years. It was time.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I want to switch gears here just a bit and talk about what maybe is going to be the new governance model here with the NCAA. There's a lot of kind of unknowns. Of course, the NCAA put out that presentation, PowerPoint. I don't know what it was, but you could listen to somebody speak about what this new proposed governance model is going to be. Next week is a very big week potentially for that. And I want to talk Tarleton State. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty
Yeah,
about what's going to change and all that kind of stuff. I want to hear it from you guys, because the last time we talked, and you mentioned it earlier, you clearly have a goal of moving to FBS. And you're obviously building that with everything that we've talked about here, the
sure.
facilities, the opting in, the revenue sharing, clearly you're building for that. Do you see that possibly there could be an opportunity coming up here within the next maybe 3, 4, 5 months with a new governance model that may make it easier to move for Tarleton or any FCS school to move up to the FBS ranks? Is there anything that you're hearing on that? Is that something you guys are looking at, or you're going to maybe just wait and see what happens and then kind of live with that new
Yeah.
reality, if you will?
I don't know that it makes it any easier. Obviously, you're looking at two different models. Now, you guys both know there's been a separation for many years anyway.
Hmm.
So, and you can call it haves and have-nots. But really, what they're trying to do in the original proposal was to try to move more of the regulation down to the conferences, and kind of get out of the weeds per se from an NCAA level. You could, in one model, a collaborative model, you'd have everybody working together to keep under one governance structure, or you'd have the bifurcated model where you'd have the two different structures where your autonomy or your Power Four schools have a weighted approach. They've had the power for a long time,
Yeah.
and you have to understand that is the way it is, and we have to figure out where we fit and what we want to do and where we want to compete. And we have, as an institution, never hid the fact that our ultimate goal at some point, don't know when, is to be an FBS institution, and that still remains as our goal. But right now, what we're doing is trying to do everything we can to win at the FCS level, to put our stake in it, and we're going to do that and have done that.
Well, and that's something, being relatively new to D1 and until last year, not being able for your student athletes to participate in the postseason. You're just like this past school year that we talked about was really the first year that they could do that. So it's a great thing that whatever level you're at, they're experiencing something new. You talked about the football team making the FCS playoffs, not just making, but winning in the first round of the FCS playoffs.
Sure.
The students going up to Oregon and all of that. So, that's a huge change for your university. And in a great way. I mean, you're competing at another level right now in the postseason that you haven't really been able to do before. And yes, continue to grow, continue to move on. But whether it's a year or two or whatnot, I'm happy to see to kind of go back to where we started, that you had 7 students going to Eugene, Oregon, competing in the D1 national championships is phenomenal. So
Yeah,
congrats to
I,
you
I
guys.
think what it comes down to for us is positioning ourselves. What our ultimate goal is to take out all the questions that a conference might have as it relates to Tarleton State University. And what would those be? Do they have the budget? Do they have the facilities? Do they have the infrastructure? Do they have the staff? And whether it's a year, 2 years, 5 years down the road, we know that we want to be ready right now so that we can compete. We want to win right now. Right now, that's in the United Athletic Conference and in the WAC. And it's really amazing to me as I go back and I look at that transition period, how successful our programs were during that whole process. It's a 4 year process,
Mhm.
tough to win. But by and large, all of the sports, which had nothing to do because it was all prior to my arrival, did well. And that's really part of the reason why we've been able to make the transition probably easier than a lot of other places because of the environment. And we put ourselves, they put us at the time in a situation where we could succeed. I mean, you've been in the football stadium, you know what it looks like. It's a great football stadium.
Well, and I have to say, we're not, a part of any conference, but as an
Right.
outsider, I can tell you
Sure.
exactly what you said. You are, checking all the boxes. So when that time comes, it's not a question of are they ready? It's clearly, yes, they're 100% ready. We're silly not to send an invite. And I have to say this, but I'm a Mountain West guy. I really hope the Mountain West has given you guys a good hard look because I think you'd be a phenomenal add to any conference. But again, because I follow the Mountain West, I have to throw out that I think it'd be a great add to the Mountain West. So,
Well, and
Sure.
when I don't know if you saw the interview, we had Commissioner Gloria Nevarez on, and I wasn't trying to put her on the spot too much, but I did throw Tarleton State out there. It's just an example of an FCS program that might be a good fit. So we're definitely, you're always on our minds. I wanted to maybe another quick follow up on just the nuts and bolts of revenue sharing. Especially getting an opportunity to have an athletic director. You guys have to, the presidents and all these people, they come up with these grand plans, big ideas. You guys actually have to make it work and make it happen on a day-to-day basis. So revenue sharing, as far as and just NIL in general, because we've had a few
Sure.
years now of NIL. How do you guys educate your players? Do you feel a responsibility for like additional? Because you mentioned before we went 50 years or whatever without giving anything to the players. Now all of a sudden, we started with stipends. Now we're going to do some revenue sharing. They can get NIL deals. How do you approach that as far as educating them because they are student athletes
Sure.
in financial literacy, how not to get into bad contracts? 'Cause, I mean, I'm sure you want to educate them on compliance so that they don't become ineligible. But what about the other stuff of just not getting into a bad contract and just how to handle their money?
Yeah, that's a big part of what we have to do, and that's actually part of the legislation. When you opt in, you have to provide the education, necessary to help those student athletes make decisions. I think the big thing that we're dealing with right now is educating on number one, how not to get into a bad situation with an outside representative or an agent. Uh, we are very clear with our student athletes. It's written out in the new contracts and agreements that they are responsible for paying taxes. I think that's our responsibility to educate them. I've had a couple of discussions. I'm waiting. I'd love to see student athletes turn around and figure out what's the first thing that I can invest in. So that in 43 years I use this and I average 6, 7, 8% return. What does that 10, 15, or $20,000 turn into after that period of time? And we have a responsibility to provide that education. So we'll use outside entities to come in and talk about investing, making good decisions. And I'll tell you, sometimes the toughest things is our family, because student athletes, it doesn't matter what institution I've been at, have an obligation and have always worked to try to support families in many cases. And sometimes that's hard to say no. And, we're trying to teach all of our student athletes how to say no to all those different things that could negatively impact them. I meet with recruits every week, guys, and my standard response is 10 or 15 years down the road, nobody's going to care what kind of athlete you were. And you may have a tremendous, career, but by and large, the numbers are pretty small that go on to play professionally. I always do tell them my ultimate goal is that you graduate from Tarleton State, you go out and make millions of dollars, and you donate half of it back to us. It doesn't always happen that way, but I think the whole key is we've got a responsibility to help them through this process and make good decisions, because 18, 20, 22-year-old young men and young women really don't have the ability to understand what those finances can turn into and become later in life.
Yeah, no doubt about that. That's something every young adult should absolutely be hearing and learning. And that's certainly something we didn't get as young adults. I think we're finally, as a country, as educators, becoming wise to that. Like, hey, we need to teach them financial literacy to have them be successful. So let's just end with one thing. You brought up the weight room. It affects all of your athletes. Let's finish with that. Appreciate all your time so far. But can you talk about the new weight room you have?
Yeah, I can. So what we did, we're excited about that. So there's dominoes when you add facilities. So the first domino that started was when Tarleton State years ago started to plan for the EECU Center. So that opens in August, which freed up Wisdom Gym to become a volleyball facility. Yes, we'll still have basketball practice and those types of things when necessary in there if we have a conflict over at the EECU Center. But by and large, volleyball will use that. So there's very few institutions that have that exclusively for their volleyball program. We took the old volleyball gym, nearly 10,000 square feet, and turned it into a performance center, a weight room per se, where we've added all the staff offices, all the stations necessary for our kids to excel, put in a fueling station for nutrition purposes. Starting next year, we'll have nutrition staff that actually will be on our sidelines, that will travel with our football program, that will provide those types of things and types of support so that our student athletes can have the best possible experience and put them in a chance to succeed. But that is going to be another one of our facilities that'll showcase our commitment to student athletes succeeding. I think we could, with the right amount of money, we could put your names on it.
Hey, maybe someday you can have a big mountain center or something. I think we got a little ways to go before that happens. So,
well, it's a fun time to be here, and I look out here, to the right. Our growth is big, and it's not just athletics. They're going to open a med school, health sciences buildings going up as we speak. University has 2 residence halls that have been approved at the Board of Regents level. Growing all the time. Heard today that our freshman applications are over 20,000 applications. And I believe last year actual admits were around 3,200. You can go out and research some Power 4 institutions that have numbers around that for freshmen. So perfect location for students to come from the Metroplex and still get a feel of being away from home, but yet close enough. And you can look at the transfer portal in all of our sports. We're getting kids that are coming from your Power 4 institutions to play several of our sports.
Well, great things happening down there at Tarleton State. As I said earlier, I am super excited to visit here in October, homecoming weekend. It'll be a blast. Steve, thank you so much for giving your time with us here on the Big Mountain again.
Guys, thank you very much. Know that you're always welcome in Stephenville. Lots of good things going on. Come on and see us.
Appreciate it.
Catch you later.
Again, we thank Steve for joining us here on the Big Mountain. Great to hear more about Tarleton State, a school that you and I have been talking about for quite a while. Really interested to see kind of where they're headed here over the next couple of years. What do you think there, Steve?
Yeah, great interview. It was great having him on again. just kind of get an update on the program, a program that's, on a rising track, an ascending track. So again, great to hear from. I love having when we have the athletic directors on. We all the news and the headlines usually comes from college commissioners and presidents. They come up with these grand plans and ideas, but the ADs, like we talked about with him, they have to implement this. They have to make it happen. They have to live and work within a budget. All of those things. So it's great having him on here and talking about the nuts and bolts conversation about what's really happening. And I will say I did notice, a difference in kind of tone and reaction to the things that are going on from from the Tarleton perspective. And I think a lot of that has to do with they're just on such a great growth potential, great growth track that everything is exciting to them. There was a big move up to to Division I and FCS status. They've knocked that out of the park.
Right.
They're doing great. They're on a great track where if they do want to move up to FBS at some point, they're just putting everything together. And the sky is the limit for this program. So I'm going to continue to be a heavy proponent for them. I love what they're doing. And so it was just great having their AD on again.
Yeah, as you said, great trajectory. I want to say they could ascend together with some of the Mountain West programmings is kind of the new tagline there. But man, we hit everything. You look at the budget, it's continuing to increase. I mentioned that it's comparative to FBS universities right now, and they're only going to continue to grow. We talked about facilities again. It was great to get in kind of an update on where things are at with that and continued growth of the facilities. Of course, the revenue sharing and, how is this going to affect schools moving forward? AD Uryasz there said that, they even hired somebody right now. When we're talking about a lot of schools worried about their budgets and how can they afford athletics and how can they afford revenue sharing, they're adding staff in order to help their student athletes with NIL and revenue sharing. That was a great question by you too. So just so many things to like about this school. And I'm glad it's a school we follow really closely. Whichever way they end up going, whether they continue FCS here for a while or they're able to move to FBS, I will continue to follow the Texans. And as I said, super excited to visit the campus here in a couple months. So,
one thing I really liked kind of hearing from the horse's mouth on one subject, we've brought up many times about how important athletics is, for these universities as we get to the enrollment cliff.
Yes.
That is a real thing.
Yes.
It's important for these universities. Athletics becomes kind of whether they're self-funded or partially funded marketing arm for the university. So we heard from the AD, they got on ESPN. That's huge. The mothership.
Yes.
And they could see right away the tangible benefits. The website clicks, which turned into great admission, that wasn't the only thing driving admissions, but a part of it. They could see the increase in admissions clicks. Or website clicks. They can see, their admission is going great. Their enrollment is going great. They're just on a great trajectory, and they are actually seeing the benefit of that increase in athletics, increased success and performance, and the elevation of their athletics programs. So it was great to hear from him in person, from that directly.
Well, a great leader there at Tarleton. I know Dr. Hurley, a great leader there, the president for Tarleton State University. Again, a school we're going to be following very closely. So again, want to thank AD Uryasz for joining us here in the Mountain. Hey, make sure you give this one a like and subscribe if you like our content. We are gearing up for football season 2025, only about 2 months away. And a month from now, Steve, we will be in Vegas for the Mountain West Media Days. It's going to be a great time, and we'll have tons of content for all of our fans. So, hey, with that, we thank you guys for watching this episode, and we'll see you next time on the Big Mountain.